Well, look at that. We are back. We are back with a DEFCON 1 science. It has been ages since we did one. And I know Landon really likes DEFCON 1 science, for whatever reason. You know, who am I to judge? But we are going to be doing a DEFCON 1 today because I have Landon here, and we're going to be talking about some math stuff and metaphysics stuff and the Malpass discussion with William and Craig. I also got Cheshire here, who has spent an enormous amount of time this morning learning about this kind of stuff. So that's great.
I have no legitimate. There's no reason I should actually be here. I just am.
It's just we're just using you. You know, just sit there and look pretty and say something occasionally. What we actually, I love having somebody like Cheshire who doesn't really know much about math or care to per se, right? I mean, I'm not saying she's a nap, but I mean, she's not.
I like math.
You like math,
okay? About math.
But we figure if Landon and I can explain it, and Cheshire goes, I get that, then anybody should be able to get it, right? Right.
Pretty much. I'm the layman in the room that's just here to help ask questions, and I usually do a quick Google search of what we're talking about, so I'll have a very slight understanding, just so that way I'm not completely off topic.
Yeah,
I've also decided that beer is going to be my math drink, and wine is going to be my philosophy drink, and rum and whatever is going to be my I'm just chillin' talking drink, and my idiot drink is just going to be some combination of all of it.
We call that a bar shot or match shot.
The I can't with this is just going to be some kind of weird liquor concoction.
What are you drinking tonight, Landon? What do you got for us?
Well, first of all, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone, latitude, and medical status, and even hemisphere. It's good to be with you, and hello from your friendly secular astronomer. I have wine, so I guess if that's what I'm supposed to be doing with sciencey stuff, I have two wines that are potential. One is a Paranet. It's a really nice. It's a nice Spanish wine that really was just knock your socks off. Great wine that I got. They have a sister winery in San Luis Obispo that I visited. And for the alleged continent of Australia, I've got Penfold Bin 407, a 2015 cab. So I have a 2015 Arnault and a 2015 cab. For the alleged continent of Australia.
Well, there you go. I'm actually going to move myself over here so people can actually see Chesh that she hasn't. I guess I was blocking everybody. There we go. I'll drink that. That sounds good. I'm just drinking coffee.
Also, Steve, so do I have a permission to stream this down to the Admission Scott South Pole base?
You can do whatever you wish.
Okay, so it's
knock yourself out. Full permission. Full permission. There you go.
Okay, link. I'm linking on sending that stream there. So our friends down in the South Pole.
So cool.
The sunset on the 21st, and it won't rise until around September 20th. So they're going to go through their six month nights. Now twilight there, and you get this is a really cool time because they've got this basically sunset that kind of lasts for weeks, right? It's
wow.
Because the sun just slowly, it's now just too far. Although,
peaking.
If the high pressure is enough, it'll actually pop up above and then back down again for things. But it'll eventually we'll get to sort of twilight, to long twilight. But they are they're isolated. No one's going anywhere, and so I wish my friends at the Advent Scott base hello.
Hello to them.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
And this was a guy that when I was out there on the iridium phone last time at the South Pole thing, I was calling him about flat earther stuff. This was a guy. He's not a flat earther.
Yeah.
Steve is not a flat earther.
And I had asked him to make sure that that gravity still worked down there. So on the Iridium satellite phone, I had Landon, Curt, and Noll jump up and down at the South Pole just to make sure he didn't fall off into outer space.
Well, we
glad
know
to say
you
he's
guys
still
are
with
both
us.
Lying. So. We know you're lying because a satellite phone wouldn't work on a flat Earth.
Yeah,
obviously that's all fake.
Yep. We just made all that up.
And hopefully, I'll just say if Red Eye's there, I understand. By the way, Red Eye just did ask the question. Asked a favor for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere. Don't stomp on the ground hard because they can hear it in their ceiling, right? It's be kind to the people floor below you, right?
So, anyways,
just kidding.
Gonna piss off the mole people.
If you guys had watched the debate this morning, it was pretty interesting. Dr. Malpass, who's a friend of mine, got an actual debate with Dr. William Lane Craig. I thought that was amazing. I thought that, William Lane Craig, I think, is a very good debater. I think he's a good orator. I think I don't agree with him on his arguments, but he
speaks well.
He speaks well, and he had a great discussion with Dr. Malpass. However, there was using some terminology that I think was confusing people, because if people don't really understand what they were arguing about, then what was the point of the discussion? Because this is what I don't really care about debates too much, because if you just have two people going at it, nobody even understands what's going on. It's not going to. It doesn't really interest me. What I like to see is a discussion between two people that's moderated and informative, right? Like Landon.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that it was well discussed, but it wasn't very well. It wasn't very educational. It wasn't very well understood, I think.
Which is fine. That's not the point of that kind of debate, right?
By the way, before we get too far, hello, Josh, and I'll ask you: should I use the Spanish wine or the Australian wine first?
Spanish.
Okay.
Spanish
it is. It's an excellent wine.
Es muy importante español. Yeah. Yeah, magnifico. Okay, so I thought we would have a two-part hangout. One, we're going to be talking about some of the things that they were discussing, which is metaphysics and math. So that's why I brought Landon in. We're going to start with the metaphysics first, and then tomorrow I'm going to be having Robert Rowe maybe coming on, aka General Han Solo. I'm going to have Hunter Bailey and MJ Dory, I think, and we're going to be actually talking about the actual debate itself. But I thought this would be a good preliminary to kind of get people kind of up to speed what the heck they were talking about. And that looks really good, by the way, Landon. Wine. That's my favorite kind of wine, dark and yeah.
Look at
bubbly.
The legs of this thing.
That's gorgeous.
That's Spanish.
That's gorgeous. That's like a sangria, man.
See there. That's. Thank you, Spain.
Is that like a deep red wine? It's got fruity flavor.
Let me correct myself. This is not a Spanish wine. This is a Catalonian wine. Catalonia is the occupied part of Spain, and my Catalonian friends would be remiss, even though it says product of Spain. It is of Catalonia.
Fair correction.
Yeah, fair correction. I would drink it no matter what. You can call it America rice wine. I don't care. I'd still drink it.
Looks delicious.
Yeah, it looks delicious. Frothy.
Review.
So we're gonna have a sommelier hang out one of these days, so he can just talk about wines. But going back to the whole Malpass debate. By the way, I did message Malpass, told him I was going to be talking about this stuff, and I did ask him a question about what they disagreed on, because it was a question about what I didn't know what the disagreement was. So maybe by tomorrow I'll get an answer back on that. But one of the things they brought up, Landon, was dealing with a metaphysical aspect of what it means to have persistence or endurance. And this perdurance versus endurance is a very metaphysical relationship. And it's very important when it comes to infinities, of what it means to exist from time and time, from one place to another over time and space. As you know, that their debate was on the Coulomb cosmological arguments, which is primarily centered around A theory of time. Okay? So in order for that argument to really make sense, it's the A theory of time versus the B theory of time. The difference in a nutshell is that one is tensed and one is tenseless. But what does it mean to exist from one aspect of time to another? The way the Stoics, or I wasn't the Stoics, it was the academic skeptics, the way they looked at it is that they thought that either you cease to be from one moment to another, and that every moment was a new creation of itself, including the universe. It was created de novo every new instance. Because if you think about their reasoning, I am not the same person I was a second ago as far as our properties. I'm in a different time and space. The Earth is going around the sun. So the me that existed even a second ago has different properties than the me now, right? And so they argued, how is it that you have a continual endurance of a person? And this goes to something called the debtor's paradox. I don't know if you're familiar with that to the outside chat, but the debtor's paradox was a paradox, more of a, I don't know if it's a veridical paradox like that, but go ahead.
All right, can I pause and say,
sure.
I do want to also mention, because I'm fascinated by what you're saying, but also want to acknowledge God's Auditor, who, by the way, is a really amazing wine.
I love him,
and I had the pleasure of meeting him up in the state of Washington when you were allowed to do that, and he brought over
when you're allowed,
two knock your socks off wines that they do. I don't know how many barrels they do per year, but but they are serious winemakers, and it's a shame they don't have a tasting room or something, because the stuff was actually quite good and quite well. So I'm glad to hear that you've got 14 gallons of your 2016 Sangiovese left. That was an amazing wine. And you just tapped your 2017 or 2018 Cabernet. So I look forward to the time when I'm allowed to go back up to the state of Washington, meet with a guy, and get some wine. Hopefully we can work on how to get it into my suitcase and home. The wine you gave me worked. But yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, he sent me a bottle of scotch, and I still have that bottle of scotch, a Glenlivet
Customs.
12. I've got about half the bottle of Glenlivet 12 left that he sent me.
But
He keeps trying to tell me to figure out how to get him how to send stuff to me in Canada.
Yes, and shipping alcohol is really difficult. People think that prohibition was repealed, but getting alcohol from between states in the U.S. is very difficult. Getting alcohol over the Canadian border is extraordinarily difficult. I defy you to find, except maybe you might find an occasional ice wine there, a Canadian wine in the United States, even though we have this free trade. Because remember, free trade is about screwing the other country on your pet products, right?
Yeah, when I went visiting, I went to I think it was called an ADC, which is like the equivalent of a liquor store down in the States. Because all of our liquor stores are done with the government. Like, they're all government based. So you have to go through the Canadian government to get any liquor. Some beers you can get without the government's true involvement. Like, there's beer stores, but they allow for selling of some wines and beer now in grocery stores. So they're starting to loosen up a little bit. But I went to like an ABC, and I couldn't find like an Ontario wine. Just like, no way.
I need to bring it back a little bit, Landon, because we're on a time crunch.
We're way off topic.
Yeah, way off topic.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, God's editor.
Thank you, God's editor.
So Steve, you're talking about time, right?
I'm talking about persistence and how things persist through time, whether they endure or whether we're the same. Like, I was talking about the debtor's paradox. With the debtor paradox is something along the lines that Ken Hovind would really probably appreciate, because Ken Hovind ran that argument that he's not the person he was because he signed this special way which made him a legal thing, right? So he's like, I'm not that person who owes that money. The debtor paradox is something similar, saying, hey, I'm not the person I was 20 years ago. Therefore, that person 20 years ago owes you the money. I don't owe you the money. That's the thing behind that paradox.
But I would argue, and again, we're dealing philosophical and not scientific. Consequences follows. Society has determined that if you do something, then sometime later you have to handle the consequences of what you do.
But what does it mean to be you? The argument is that you are not you. You are you now, and this is the thing with self-identity. The law of identity is that it is necessarily true that you are you, but it's not necessarily that you must exist.
Is it fair to say that causality is what the consequences come? So when you do something, the causality that happens from your actions is where the consequences.
It wasn't me though. It was that guy 10 years ago that did it. He's the one that did it. I'm a different person now because I don't have the same properties.
But you are responsible for the causality that got you to where you are, and you're responsible for the causality that you cause in the future.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in society they've deemed that the debtor's paradox is not sufficient, right? It is a philosophical question, not a legal question, right? Not you. What you means to be you.
I stole a channel from my friend and tens of thousands of dollars a year ago, but that was a year ago. That was a different me.
Oh, by the way, that reminds me, just real quick, Landon. I did the intro myself 100%. And I guess for some reason, having Google Hangouts isn't like cool. I like having Google Hangouts. I will continue to have Google Hangouts when I want to have Google Hangouts. Because you know what? Here's the thing, Landon. When you have a quality guest on, the graphics and the music and all that stuff are incidental, right? I mean, and you have the ability to actually host something properly,
And if you have a quality co-host too.
Yeah. Well, one of these I'll find one. Yeah.
Oh dear.
I'm kidding. I bring Cheshire for everything. She's like fabulous for this stuff.
And this is pretty as a fascinating thing of how science and philosophy has kind of diverged. From a scientific point of view, we talk about causality as being an important stuff. And in fact, when you talk about what time is, one of the things you find in physics is that you could talk about causality that appears to have an areal of time, even though mathematically time appears to be quite flexible going forward and backwards. Causality, thermodynamics, going forward.
Well, this is one thing they argued, on that, about the difference between going forward infinitely and going infinite regressive in the past, because William and Craig argues that you cannot logically have past regression. I don't think he's correct on that. I think that there's nothing illogical about it. But Dr. Malpass was pointing out the fact that asynchronous between past causality and future causality, if you have limited in the past, then you have to be limited in the future. You can't have a beginning and no you can have a beginning with no end, but I don't think you can have a end with no beginning, right?
Why is that?
Well, if you have no, if something didn't have, this is the argument. This is their argument that if you,
but that doesn't. Right. But is that an axiom that they're stating?
It depends on your theory. It depends on your A theory of time or B theory of time, right? The persistence of an A theory of time, right, is because it's tenseless. You exist in the moment, right? But
well, can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
I thought that the problem with the argument that was being made by Craig and kind of ended up getting caught by Alex as well, that kind of they got stuck on, is this assumption that time was linear. But just because we experience time in a linear fashion does not mean it is in fact linear.
I don't know what else it would be, though. The time's arrow is a linear function of entropy, right? As the universe gets more entropic, that's its direction of which we consider to be the direction of time, right? Which
that arrow of time is considered to be causality.
Causality. But now I don't believe, by the way.
Does that make it linear, though?
What else would it be?
But understand, mathematically, for example, particle physics, you can treat a antiparticle as a particle going backwards in time, even though it isn't. But you can treat it.
Feynman diagram would show a positron, electron, positron going back in time.
And that was merely a diagrammatic thing of what stuff said. And when Dirac, for example, theorized the positron, the anti-electron, part of it was that the mathematics is that it's electron going backwards in time. It was discovered. And interesting enough, positrons have consequences, right? That when a positron exists in our universe, it tends to find an electron quite quickly and annihilate, and you get a pair of a gamma ray pair coming out of that. That's called a causality arrow. Even though mathematically you can treat it as going backwards in time, but understand, in physics, mathematics does not tell physics what to do. Mathematics is a tool physics uses to try to model reality, but mathematics does not dictate to reality what it does.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's necessarily going backwards in time.
So it's having a mathematical model that you can treat mathematically an antiparticle as a normal particle going backwards in time doesn't mean that's what it does. That's just a way of expressing it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So back to philosophy, if causality is the thing that's going forward, then and they always say consequences are, you do something. Yes, you are not the same quantum state and time and space as you were before, but you are held responsible for the causality you create.
Right, but the philosophical argument is, are you still you? What does it mean to be you? Right? Yeah. I mean, if you eliminated certain essential components, and this goes to essentialism and what's called functionalism, essentialists would say that there's something essential about somebody or something that makes that them. I would argue even one further that what's called, I think this is the term functionalism, that certain things have to have a function. Or if they do have a function, if they're no longer functional, they are no longer what it is. For example, people would argue, I'm not necessarily a functionalist, but a functionalist would argue something along the lines of a can opener that doesn't open a can is no longer a can opener. Right, it is just a piece of metal. I
imagine you run into that problem because just because a can opener is broken doesn't mean its intended purpose was still. But that's
what a functionalist would argue.
A can opener is merely a label you add to an object.
Yeah, but we're just
based
labels
on what
ourselves,
it does or
right?
what it's designed to do.
Right?
But human beings don't have that.
I say, what is the name of this? I say it's can opener. And you say that's an odd name for it because it doesn't look like a can opener.
But what makes Landon, right? Landon exists, right? And so what makes what is the essential nature of Landon that makes you with that indexical when you say I? When I say I, that's the indexical, right? So what makes Landon? What is the essentialist component of that if you're an essentialist? What can change about you? And this goes into the whole question of brain states too. One sec. This goes to the whole question of brain states. If Landon's brain was changed to such a degree that he was no longer the person we recognize, he was somebody who just hates math. He hates wine. He likes to go, punch people or, go down the street and just, that's no longer the same person per se, even though we recognize that it's the same person we call Landon, but is he essentially who he was before? Or is this a whole different new personality? So what makes somebody what they are, and what makes it persistence throughout time?
But
right?
Being different doesn't mean you're no longer you. It means you have changed. But again, on the other hand,
okay, because that like what you're saying is the can opener is still a can opener even if it no longer functions as a can opener.
Not to a functionalist, I don't think. To a functionalist,
right?
They would say that it doesn't. If it no longer has the ability to function as its intended purpose, it's no longer that thing.
But then I would ask a functionalist and say, okay, well, this person got brain damage. Do I still identify them by the same name, even though they act in a completely different manner from the way I knew them before?
Yeah.
Well, of course you do. No, you would still use the same name.
Right, we do. But that's just a semantic thing, right? But is it essentially the same person? If the person has a completely different brainwave state, are they effectively the same person as they would before? And
but if you got a speeding ticket, you go for the judge and you say, I'm not the person that got the speeding ticket.
Well, we already agree that society's not. Yeah, we already agree. This is not a societal issue. This is a philosophical question, like the ship of Theseus, right?
And it's not
the whole thing.
And I don't mean pejorative. It's not even necessarily a scientific question as well.
No, it's pure philosophy. Like ship of Theseus. If you somewhat like the academic skeptics would argue, if you replace anything of a system, it is a new system. Like the ship of Theseus, every time you replaced a part, it is a new ship. That's the way they would argue it. I don't necessarily agree with that, right? Again, I think
I wouldn't agree with that.
Yeah, I think there's some essentialism to be had there. But this goes to what the William Lane Craig and Malpass discussion was dealing with.
It might depend on what you define as the system, though.
The object. This is the whole thing for persistence.
Right, but if I replace my arm, that's not necessarily an effect on the system that is who I am or my consciousness or how I identify.
But that's because we identify as the conscious, right? Not the part.
But exactly. Yeah. So if you were to replace a part of my brain, however, then yeah.
So what's the essential part? The essentialist would say that your mind is what makes you, right? But then you have what's called eliminative materialism. And under eliminative materialism, the mind doesn't really exist the way people think it does. It's just not something that really has ontology as what we would think it to be. I'm not an eliminative materialist, but I understand that it is a viable position to think that way, that consciousness is more of an illusionary type thing. And I think there's some arguments to be had for that. But the ship of Theseus, for example, what makes the ship of Theseus a ship? What is it that you replace? If I replace the engine of that ship, we can still consider it the same ship, right? If I replace your heart, you're still Cheshire, but if I praise your mind, right, or your brain,
that's the fundamental difference.
That's the essential.
Right? That's the fundamental difference between a can opener or a ship and replacing all the parts versus replacing like a consciousness and an amalgamation of memory or experiences.
So bring it back to time and infinities and so forth.
We're getting there.
One of the things that is interesting in terms of cosmology when you talk about the Big Bang is that there's some models that talk about the Big Bang creating time, and some models talk about the fact that because one of the philosophical questions asked is what was there before the Big Bang,
which I think is a question that's malformed.
And if it turns out that time and causality was established at the moment of the Big Bang, asking about what happened before the Big Bang may be equivalent to asking what is south of the South Pole.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just because it's a question doesn't mean it has a valid answer.
Correct.
And so there are cosmology things that sit there and say, the Big Bang created time and space, and we're seeing the consequences of it.
So do you hold that the universe, the whole purpose of the cosmological argument, which by the way they didn't really discuss that much, is that everything has a beginning has a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore has a cause, right? And I think there's some problems we had in there. Don't get me wrong. It's valid, right? But it's definitely logically valid. That's not the issue. But there's a question on the premises of what it means to begin, and that's why he holds to a theory of time. Now, I agree with you. I think we can model back to t equals 0 on the Big Bang. And as you know, I talked to Lawrence Krauss on that very thing on the no boundary proposal, which you're familiar with. And I think that's a very fascinating subject, using imaginary time to go back to t equals 0. Great, we can do that. But that doesn't mean inherently that there is a beginning to be had. And again, I do tend to be theory of time. I think that is the best way to look at science and physics, but B theory of time has problems too. There's no one set way of looking at things.
Well, from a scientific point of view, we don't know, right?
Yeah.
And again, one of the things that science is about asking questions. It's not about answers. So if you say, well, why don't you have an answer about what happened before the Big Bang? The answer is, I don't know. And at least I'm honest to admit that, right?
Yeah. Or it's just not answerable.
The answer,
it may not be answerable.
And we're working on it. And it may be one of those things we won't know. Now, there's also in physics and cosmology, various mini worlds models that talk about the fact that when there's decision points, the system bifurcates or infricates to a set of stuff, and that what our now is merely following along on a particular causality timeline. So when you have quantum states where it can go one way or the other, for example, and we measure it and we're on state B rather than state A, it isn't that state A went away, it's that we're no longer on that world line.
Well, that bifurcation is the multi-world hypothesis, and that
I don't know if that's true or not, but it's interesting.
Well, they discussed Copenhagen interpretation vice multi-world. The Copenhagen interpretation is more along the lines of that you actually have a wave function. There's a measurement problem to be had there, but when the wave function collapses,
it doesn't make sound.
It doesn't split off. Okay, I mean that's the Copenhagen interpretation.
Sorry, that was a flat earther joke.
But part of the thing of this thing is that in mathematics, again, that may not be reality. You could have systems where stuff comes into being. You could have singularities, but it doesn't mean that singularities exist. You could have a case where the Big Bang event can create time or establish time, and yes, you can talk about it is valid to say 1 second before the Big Bang, but it may have no causal relation to what happened 1 second after the Big Bang.
I would agree with that.
Could be is that
okay, so like time is beyond, but it's not. You're starting from 0 at this point because it's essentially going again, right? I think I get it. I think I understand what you're saying.
Well, hang on. There are conjectures out there, and Landon, correct me if I'm wrong. There's conjectures out there of universes that existed prior to ours that have reverse entropic states that actually are going back. That went backwards instead of going from a state of low entropy to high entropy. It was just reverse. It was basically what we would consider reversal time arrow. But they're isolated from it. It was a condition of the state of being that is completely isolated from us spatial temporally.
I have problems with that because I don't understand the physics that allows causality to go in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big thing.
Well, the physics would be totally different in that type of reality.
So you won't hear me say that's wrong. I will say I don't understand the physics that allows causality to go in reverse.
It would just be an entire different state of physics. I mean, for example, like one of the reasons why the problem with persistence argument.
Theoretically.
I'm not saying
theoretically,
I say I don't understand that physics. So.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
because we don't know reference point.
Yeah, we don't know about that type of physics. Yeah. But one of the things that physics. Well, real quick, one of the things that physics is used for this, actually, Landon, is that the notion that we are like destroyed from one moment to another, right? There are new universes being created. We're new units of objects that we call per endurance from one state of being to another. There's a problem with that with science is that violates the law of conservation of energy and mass. And what's one of the arguments against that type of reasoning from philosophy is that it would seem to be violating a lot of things that we know about our universe, that the universe is going to like disappears and it comes back new de novo every Planck second. Right.
This has been a problem. I think that it's a crisis in philosophy, but they're not addressing it. Is at one time philosophy was actually much more on a scientific basis.
Yeah.
Now science and philosophy have
diverged. Yeah, but there's still I mean, we had a modern philosopher.
There's unfortunately very little philosophical input into the scientific process.
I disagree with that.
opposed to
Methodological naturalism is the whole science is predicated on methodological naturalism. But there is modern philosophers that think this way. He's dead. But David Lewis thought this way.
Now, and you do not have somebody posting in Astrophysical Journal or Physics Today a philosophical question that philosophy doesn't come up there and say to science, hey, blah blah blah.
Right.
It's unfortunately that the two fields have diverged. And that I'm not saying that philosophy is bad or that science is non-philosophical. I'm saying that the two fields have diverged, and it's rare. I'm not saying impossible, but it's rare when modern philosophy has something to say that impacts how science
I'm not quite sure I agree with that, though.
And
the reason I don't is look.
Stop! You didn't hear what I said because you began to talk before I finished, and a predicate was critical. So let me try it again. It appears as if science and philosophy have diverged, and that philosophy is having little effect on modern science, and I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah, but like I said, I think that's not quite the case. I mean, look at the modal dependent realism, right? Model dependent realism was predicated on trying to understand scientific realism, right, as opposed to scientific instrumentalism. So Stephen Hawking, he was coming up with a completely kind of, I think, somewhat novel approach to models relating to reality. Now, again, I agree with you 1,000%. Models do not dictate the way reality is. They do. They're in no way prescriptive. The reality has no responsibility or onus or anything to act the way we think it should. Models completely, utterly descriptive. Do they actually represent reality is a different question. That is a philosophical question.
Hawking's discussion about whether information is conserved or not, about whether or not the things like the holographic theory, so forth. Those questions are unfortunately scientifically going to be answered in a scientific context. Philosophers can weigh in, but philosophers, unfortunately, for the most part, have very little scientific method to input into science, and I think that's an unfortunate situation.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the holographic principle.
Because scientists are not required to study philosophy.
I have a question.
Sure.
Seems to be divorced from science to some extent.
Do you think that might change with the amount of VR and the better AI gets and the better that we get at augmented reality, that maybe philosophy will actually have a place to grow in a scientific stance as well as become more relevant to, like day-to-day life if we start dealing with augmented reality and AI?
Well, I let Steve answer first, or I can answer. Which?
Go ahead.
I mean, I think you're asking. So can you rephrase your question so I can make sure I understand the question you're asking?
Do you think that philosophy might have more of a basis in science as well as into day-to-day life moving forward into the future because of advancements in technology such as AI or augmented reality or virtual reality?
No, I think I wish it was, but I think what's happening is that philosophy as a study, let's say in universities, are not required or mandated to have also have a scientific basis, and science does not require to understand philosophy. Yet they both touch on each other's realm, and you have therefore scientists doing things that are poor, are indefensible philosophical arguments, and you have philosophers who don't understand science and will take words like quantum mechanics stuff and go woo-woo up the wazoo out of that. Just an example.
Heard that in the debate, yeah.
and so I think both are unfortunate, right? Because I think there's things that scientists can utilize from philosophy while still adhering to the scientific method. But I think at the same time, philosophers need to understand science if they're going to make philosophical statements about science.
So add to the curriculum.
Yes. And again, notice I said I had these qualifiers, I think.
Yeah.
suggesting. I'm not saying that there isn't. There are scientists who are philosophical, and there's philosophers that are scientific. Just look at Steve.
Yeah, it's not exclusive. Yeah.
But the fields, unfortunately, are not learning well from each other and not utilizing each other well, and
there's a disconnect there.
That divergence. I think that happened. I think, for example, in the early 1900s is where they began to really diverge. When, because it's possible you could do Newtonian mechanics and sort of stuff, causality thing. You get stuff, but when you got into things like Maxwell's equations and you got into relativity and quantum mechanics, science went this way and philosophy went that way, and they haven't been anywhere close to each other.
Does the speed of science maybe affect that?
Yes,
how quickly
sure.
science advances? Yeah.
Yeah, and also
I'm sure
this is a two-part question on the beginning of the universe. It's a scientific question and it is a philosophical question. It is both.
And understand, I'm not saying that philosophy is bad or science is bad.
Right. They could do better to work together and learn from each other.
And that would be to say, it would be nice if someone who gets a PhD in philosophy were required to also get a PhD, let's say, in physics.
A requirement for a secondary PhD is a lot to ask from somebody, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, but also though, I mean, does it really?
Or just say forever sit in your metaphysics stuff and don't tell.
I the way I look at it is I look at this philosophy kind of as the grounding by which science is predicated upon, and it's what philosophy determines what's a fact, what's truth, what's knowledge, what are these conditions.
Steve,
yeah,
I would say the philosophy was what science was predicated on.
Oh, I don't think it's changed.
Not very well grounded now. I think science is no longer very well grounded in philosophy.
It should be.
And it should
sure.
be. And that's why I'm saying it's bad that they're so different, right?
I think I agree with that, especially with the way the philosophy and science are even just taught in high school. You don't touch on philosophy in high school unless you want to, unless you take that additional course that you choose to then take. You don't touch on it at all, but you're required to take science all the way to grade 10.
So it'd be nice if STEM were extended to STEMP, P for philosophy, right? And it would be nice if philosophers were required to take a heavy load of mathematics, heavy load of engineering, heavy load of technology, heavy load of science, right?
Yeah, a little bit of
I don't think
day-to-day
people take philosophy seriously enough to care.
Yeah, and I think that's unfortunate.
I don't think philosophers take science enough seriously, and science don't take philosophy enough seriously to do things.
I think it's maybe generalized, maybe, but I mean, I know people that take both very seriously. I mean, I know philosophers that love science.
And again, I understand that there are people who do both, but you got to say by and large,
I like both. I think both are important.
Astrophysics introduce a philosophical question. I get so much flame and real pushback. But
would you agree though? Look, I mean, science can give us knowledge. Let's say that if you're not a skeptic, science can give us knowledge.
Yeah.
But philosophy tells us what knowledge is. Science doesn't give us any indication what we mean when we say the word knowledge.
Sure.
That is defined in philosophy, maybe different ways, and what theory of knowledge.
I think a lot of philosophy has been relegated to what is accepted via social norms without actually having to think about it very much. And because of that, in the general populace, philosophy in school and even by people is kind of looked down upon of people just doing mental masturbation in their heads about stuff that doesn't actually have a real world application, where science could provide that real world application for philosophy to allow it to be taken more seriously in people's day-to-day lives.
Yeah. So just as in science, you're typically required to take a foreign language.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that scientists should be required to take philosophy.
Yeah, I agree.
On the other hand, I would say that philosophers trying to get a degree should have a subspecialty in science.
I agree with that too.
To remain scientifically relevant.
Yeah.
Because again, I'm not saying that either is bad, but today having a discussion with a philosopher and then you start talking about Schrodinger's equation and they might have a sense of what you're talking about, but no grounding, and you're now talking about.
Yeah, there needs to be more overlap. And by the way, I'd say I don't think you need a secondary language, right? I took Spanish. My friend took French. He never used it in his life. I mean, so I mean, I mean, I would rather get rid of that time and use it on more important things. And I'm not saying that learning a second language is not important, but I agree with you. I'd rather spend that time learning science or a little bit of philosophy. Much.
And here's
STEM.
the problem with modern science is that it's so intense and there's so much stuff and it's so beyond what any one person can actually grasp in its entirety that people tend to specialize and ignore everything else, and that's
problematic.
Yeah. And
so there are interesting philosophical things to say about cosmology, but I wish that philosophers, when stating things, could also understand a scientific context.
Right, and they might be better at communicating what they mean and arguing what they're talking about if they had some kind of grounding in philosophy. That a lot of people have that grounding in philosophy just as a passive social expectation.
And scientists would have a better way of talking about science if they had a better grounding in philosophy. So I think they're both are.
I can tell you something I can tell you something that both use. Landon, science and philosophers both use mathematics, right? It's something that's objective to both. So let's kind of switch gears into math real quick.
But I have to say, to the mathematics, in university, one of the things that was a really raging debate was who has the right to teach logic. And I'll tell you that the logic of philosophy department and the logic of mathematics were extraordinarily different.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it didn't help with the fact that one of the lead philosophy department professors and one of the lead logic mathematics department professors had thing about ex-wife and someone having an affair with so and so and so. That other thing.
Scandal.
I think logic falls into both. I don't think you can extricate logic from either of those things. Logic is mathematics. It's also philosophy. It's both conjoined. I mean, you can't say it's one or the other. It is both, right?
But when I sat and I audited the logic of philosophy, they were making statements about stuff that was mathematically unsound, but they were doing this stuff. On the other hand, in mathematics, the symbolic philosophy was so divorced. And again, that's another example of stuff where logic is quite important, right?
Yes.
Proofs and what does it mean to prove and the methods of proof and the inductive reasoning and so forth. But for example, what in the mathematical philosophy, you learn to construct valid mathematical arguments, but they should have also required us to understand logical fallacies.
Oh, I think. I do.
Oh my God! Don't get me started.
That should be taught in sixth grade.
Studying this. Yes, you should absolutely be learning logical fallacies at the same time you're starting to learn how to write essays.
Yes.
As soon as you learn how to write an essay, you should be learning about the logical fallacies. Because my God, this.
Now
write an essay that is made to convince somebody of something.
I didn't.
But we're not going to tell you what any of this is.
I kind of knew a little bit about logical fallacies.
You're not going to teach you how to be convincing.
But I didn't formally learn about logical fallacies until after I got to the Navy, after I went to college.
I haven't formally ever learned about logical fallacies. I only started learning about them like last year.
But I took a course in contemporary rhetoric and logical fallacies, and it was one of the best. It was amazing, right? Because you have to analyze the ability. You look at something like a paragraph, and they say, okay, what logical fallacies do you find in here? And by the way, our society is predicated on logical fallacies. Marketing is predicated on logical fallacies.
Well, we do not take philosophy, science, and mathematics seriously in the school system, right? Because at no point in like normal, like your K to 12, do you ever learn what the concepts are in math.
No.
You don't understand what the concepts are. You don't learn the philosophy of it. You also don't even touch on philosophy until high school, if you choose to take it.
Yeah, and so here's the thing where, for example, to be a literate scientist is going to mean you have to write papers and publish papers. And even if you're sitting there saying, I'm going to be in this pure science stuff, the problem is informal fallacies creep into scientific arguments.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I agree.
And the result, you can see even the flame wars that occur in peer-reviewed journals.
Flame wars!
Oh yes, if someone goes there and it's great, and people, and you can see letters of the editor. You trace stuff down. That's how they do it for stuff.
That's amazing. I'm just
scientific flame wars.
I've just got such a mental image of like the flame wars that I'm used to that are like YouTube comments of people just like shitting on each other, but it's science now. And it's amazing.
And understand, in academia, they are hyper political and hyper petty, typically. And not all, but hyper political and hyper petty. And the worst is that the academics are amateur politicians.
Oh no!
And they tend to be amateur philosophers, amateur mathematicians, unless they happen to be in the philosophy part or math part. And the result is a bunch of mesh of stuff. So
all
when
I'm imagining is like I'm stuck on the idea of like having a TMZ type magazine or show based on like,
drama.
Oh, this scientist has been
Sean Carroll said today, you won't believe.
So
Sunday.
And so the raging arguments in the academic synod about who has the right to teach a course called logic was an example of this problem that occurred. But scientists, one of the things that you should be having a grounding on in science is how to write papers, how to create an argument, how to produce a logical argument. And so we had a course that was just basically saying, here's the result, write it up as a paper. Here we go, write it, and that was the exercise over and over and over again to learn how to write prose. Just like saying you might be an English major, but if you've never written an essay, you don't know how to write an essay, or don't have to write a creative poem or so forth, you've missed something. Same thing in scientists. If you can't articulate it and you don't understand the logical fallacies,
this should be stuff they should be
becomes
teaching.
Pointless. Because that's the problem, is debating somebody who has no care about logical fallacies or understanding.
We know a lot of those people.
And so that's an example. That's Hovind. That's Ham. That's that Psi idiot, right? Those are people who
you don't like Psi,
and he's an idiot
at all.
He's a man who's committed intellectual suicide and has dedicated his life to making sure other people do that. I'm
gonna get Psi in here right now.
I'm so happy.
If you're listening to this.
Hey Psi 10, Landon just said you have intellectual suicide.
You
committed intellectual suicide.
Debate me, and I say you're not worth it. Oh, Landon, he's screaming away, he's running away.
Well, he wanted
no.
He wanted Scott Clifton to debate him too, and then Scott's like, "Well, you didn't answer any questions last time
because I won't play his game."
Yeah,
just like I wouldn't.
Well, I mean, I've done discussions with him, and I don't play his game.
I want to play Ham's game or the Banana Man's game because.
Yeah,
it's not.
No, I've called Site 10 out on his BS. Okay, I happen to like the guy. He's a friend.
But his life is about.
But you got to remember, he actually believes this stuff, right? He legit believes it.
How tragic, right? But anyway, back to the thing. And no, I won't debate you because it's not worth the oxygen. A waste. your arguments are a waste of oxygen. Oxygen is a non-renewable resource. And you're wasting it. Stop it.
So that's how you really feel, Landon. All right, so let's get back to this a little bit because I want to get into some math stuff since I got you in here. During the discussion, a lot of it dealt with actual.
Chesra has the papers, by the way. She's got the papers.
Let her debate Sci 10. So a lot of it dealt with actual and potential.
I think we should get Reds to do it.
A lot of it dealt with actual and potential infinities, Landon, and a lot of it dealt with things that I don't think a lot of people have exposure to. As Chess brought it up, when you're taking math in K through 12, they don't teach about real analytics, right? They don't teach you real analysis. They don't teach you about reals as much as they should, right? To this day, I still had to convince people that reals are a subset of complex numbers. They don't get that, and I'm sorry if you don't understand that, you don't understand set theory very well. And
part of the thing is our education is sent for people who get the education major. And unfortunately, as I saw it, there are many people that were getting education majors because they failed, let's say, in science, and so they went for the education major instead.
But if they're education major, they should know how to educate it. This is pedagogical stuff, right? This is how to educate.
Instead, they need to be the most scientifically literate, most mathematically literate, because that's what you want people to be teaching. I mean, the genius of Feynman was the fact that he could explain complex things in simple, non-technical terms.
Yep.
And he worked hard at doing that. That's not an easy thing to do. So education has been not treated as importantly as it is, and the result is our education system.
And let's try that. Let's try to do that right now, because again, they were talking about countable infinities and Cantor and things of that nature, and I think that is a very fascinating subject personally. And this is the disagreement that William and Craig had with Malpass, and I'm sorry, and I even watched it twice. This one part of it, I don't know what their disagreement was on what it means to be countable infinity. I'm not quite sure who was arguing what to say who I agreed with, because there's certain sets that are considered to be countable infinity, right? I mean, the naturals, right, which are alpha null, right? Your the most smallest set of infinity you can have, the naturals, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 numbers, that is a countable infinity, okay? But when they were talking about it, it didn't mean that you could sit there and actually count it. We can never in finite time count all the natural numbers, right?
And the word countable is an unfortunate term. And here again with mathematics, when you use language to describe mathematics, you run into danger zones. And you run into semantic games, right? So what they mean by countable is it's impossible to order it and enumerate the next thing, right? And that next function is capable of an infinite time covering the set. That is, no member can escape an ordering.
That's how they kind of describe potential versus actual. A potential infinity is something that distributed over time, and whether our actual infinities existing is actually a scientific, philosophical question. But when we're talking about countable, like you said, it doesn't mean that I can sit there and count all the natural numbers. Clearly, as a finite being, that cannot happen, right?
But it's possible to begin to count. A countable infinity is an infinity that's possible to begin to count, but not end.
I would put it more specifically. Maybe you could. The way I would look at it, a countable infinity is something that has to have a 1-to-1 correspondence with the natural numbers. Has to be correspondent to F null.
That's a formal definition. You're correct. I was trying to give a vernacular, but if I could just step back and say, there's a lot of people that have problems with infinity because they try to finite infinity, or they try to see infinity, or they try to conceive infinity in a finite method, and then they get all weirded out, right? And you hear people talk about almost nightmares of like trying to reach the end of infinity and see down into a infinite recurring spot or something other, and they just get all weirded out. The best thing to do is to start by accepting that infinity exists, and it's a thing.
It's at least a concept we can think of. Yeah, I don't think it's not a real number, but it's a concept.
But people try to conceive of infinity in finite means, and you're already logically false.
All right. Well, let's do that with the Hilbert. Like, for example, they brought up the Hilbert's paradox of the Grand Hotel, and the paradox I had.
Repeat the hotel thing again.
Okay, so the paradox of the Hilbert's paradox of the Grand Hotel basically states that if you have a system that has a completely filled. Okay, there's something called the pigeonhole, where if you have more objects than you have spots in a set, two would have to actually enter one set.
Yeah. So
one
an
object.
Example is if you had 100, if you had 100 portals,
and you have
101 pigeons,
right?
Not you can fill each portal, but at some point you'll have more pigeons than portals.
Correct. Okay, so that's the pigeon. That's pigeonholing. So in the well, let me get it out there, and then you can ask questions.
And also a lot of pigeon poo as well.
So the paradox of Grand Hotel is if you had every room filled in a hotel that had an infinite amount of rooms, okay, and this is one of the problems of being of having it all filled. But let's just say what it means to be everything is filled in this particular hotel. Can you make room for somebody else to come in? And Hilbert would argue, and
yes.
Yeah, and this has been proven. This is called a veridical paradox. It was a paradox at one time, but it was proven. It's a veridical paradox, means that it just seems like one, but it's not. Right. So
and the problem is that because if you think it's a paradox, you don't understand infinity.
Yeah, it's not a paradox. It just seems like one.
When they
it's
had the Hilbert
counterintuitive.
thing, they said, okay, everyone moves to the next hotel or next room over, or moves to room 2 in. I was like, okay, sure, yeah, fine.
Yeah, well, let me explain it real quick so the outside kind of knows what we're talking
there
about.
seemed like a lot of hand
Let me
waving.
explain it. Let me explain it real quick. Hang on, we haven't even explained it yet. And hang on, let's the outside know what the hell we're talking about. So what Hilbert said was n+1. And basically you just shift everybody over one room. Now you have room. And he also argued, argued.
So start by saying,
okay.
so let's say we're going to start with room 0.
Mm-hmm. Natural number, 0, okay.
And the next room is room 1 and room 2. So you have the integer, right? Every room has a number. And let's say you start off with this hotel, infinite number of rooms. Everyone has a number, natural number. And you want to add one person to this hotel. How do you do it? The answer is you tell everyone, look at your room number, go to the room number that's 1 greater than your number. So if you're in room 23, go to 24. Room 79, go to 80, right? The result is room 0 will be vacated, and you stick the next person into room 0. Everyone's moved over 1, and you've added one person to the infinite hotel. It's still full.
Yes,
but you get the room for
and
more.
you could move 0 to 2, 2 to 4. You could do integers, right, from the even integers.
You could have an infinite,
and you could have infinite number of people come in, right? Because the integers,
and you just have them go to the odd numbers.
This goes to the fact that the integers are a countable set as well, with a 1-to-1 bijection to the real numbers, right? So
hold up. Explain to people what a bijection is.
Well, I wanted to get into Hilbert what he reasoned on this for that very reason. A bijection is a very specific type of mapping between a domain and a codomain. So let's say I have 2 sets. If I have a 1-to-1 correspondence such that in the codomain, something is not used more than once and all elements are being used, that's considered to be a bijection. It's a type of what's called injection and surjection combined. So they sound confusing, but they're not. An injection is basically saying I have a 1-to-1 correspondence, so 1 in the domain does not go to 2 things in the codomain, and everything, not everything has to be used. In other words, I have like 5 elements here, I have 4 elements here, but this corresponds to this, that corresponds to this, that corresponds to this, but I have 1 left over. It's an injection, okay?
And I reword it?
Sure.
If you have a group of things and another group of things that are related, and they each have a shelf, this shelf has to correspond to this shelf, this shelf has to correspond to this shelf, and this shelf has to correlate to this shelf. So you've got 2 you could make it even 2, let's say you have 2 cabinets, and those cabinets each have shelves in them for it to be bijunctional,
one spot to another.
And they have to match. They don't have to match directly side by side, but they do have to have 1 to each.
One shelf to one shelf, right?
Yeah, so it's like if you're trying to match words on a quiz in school, where you're like, this is the scrambled word, here's all the scrambled words, and here's all the words. They all have to have 1.
Yeah, and by the way,
when you're doing for bi.
And Cheshire, when you're doing cryptography, this 1-to-1 mapping is part of the thing. Is that you map from the plain text to the scrambled text, and there's a 1-to-1 stuff, right? Every plain text has and by the 1-to-1 and onto, which means you don't have 2 things going to 1. You have 1 thing going to 1, and you go backwards, right? So when you encrypt, you go to this shelf, and you decrypt, you go back. And the way you line up the string is your key. So when you when you want to encrypt something, you have a set of things over here on shelves, and they have lines that go specifically over. Which way you wire up and put the lines over is your key.
Okay, so like you can say like this one's here, this one's going here, this one's going all the way down here to here to here to here to here, and then you can replicate those lines to then you can input that to unencrypt or re-encrypt something.
Exactly.
One way or the
and
other.
so when I show you,
got it.
You understand this. So congratulations, you understand cryptography. So if I show you a shelf and I say, what shelf did this come from? And there's no wires, you have no way of knowing.
Right.
Now,
but if I have the wires, I can figure out any shelf.
Yeah. And so we have these, what we do is computers use these mathematical functions to go from blah to blah, right? And so if you sit there and say, okay, I'm going to encrypt by adding 1, then someone says, well, it's easy. I just take whatever you've done and subtract 1 and get back, right? That's not a very good way of encrypting. So you have to way of having that mesh going. The big problem in cryptography is not how you do the mapping. It's how do you get a computer which is deterministic to do something unexpected?
Oh, okay. Right. No, that makes sense.
Especially, there's no such thing as real random so much in a computer when you're doing that kind of encrypting.
Because here's a real critical thing in cryptography. a good cryptographical system has to be survivable if someone understands how you do the wiring. So if I told you how I do the wiring of the shelves to shelves, have I given it up? Well, a good cryptographic system can have somebody understanding the method of doing the wiring, and they still can't figure it out.
Well, this is why you could have a one-time use pad and a veneer, what is it, a veneer cipher?
Yeah. But the problem is there's all the problem with the practical. So cryptography is about that mapping and doing it in a way with, particularly with computers, and having computers which are as deterministic as you can get to do something that's unexpected. And that is the essence of one of the fundamental problems of cryptography. So congratulations.
So
that's
go,
so cool.
So go back into the math stuff, Landon, real quick. So when you have an injective function, right? You have something that's an injective. That basically, like she was saying, it's one-to-one correspondence, but in the codomain you're going to have extras, right? It literally just means that you have some mapping function, right? So you have f.
Go from hither to yon.
Mapping functions to the natural numbers. So if it's an injective...
And should we real quick say that that's the way you move people within this hotel in the analogy?
Yeah, you're mapping. Right, you're mapping. Right, where we started with alpha null, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's your natural numbers, right? So those are the rooms. You're mapping to that. So if you have an injective function that is mappable to those natural numbers, you have a countable system, right? It is, at that point, countable.
And I say, think about it as you can count. You're not going to finish, but you can count.
Right. Okay, so it is countable at that point, right? For the hotel, it is countable. Now,
so let's go to the next level of stuff, which is the
subjective. All right, so the next level would be, let's say you have a subjective function, which would be you have a one-to-one correspondence, but in the codomain, you have an element that has been mapped by the domain more than one a single element. So there's not a direct one-to-one. It would be a two-to-one. Now, it's a minimum of that. It doesn't have to be. A surjection just means that you have at least one mapping in the codomain from the domain. One.
So, for example, in Chesh, there are things called modulus rings where I say, okay, you take everything, divide by 10, and take the remainder. Mm-hmm. So everything goes down to 10 things, or the clock, right? 12 things on a spot. We do it, divide by the number by 12 and take the remainder. Everything goes to 12 spots. You have a many to one spot, which means when you're on 7, you don't know, did I come from 7 or did it come from 17 or 27 or 37 or 47 or 57? Well,
because it has to be either divisible by 12 or it has to be within 12.
Let's say with 10, right? That 17, 27, 37, 47 all map the same many to one, which means if you arrive there, you don't necessarily know unless you have all the information
what you started
exactly with. Which computers, like you said, that this is critical in cryptography and computer stuff. You like to know where you came from, right? Because especially if you have references, if you have multiple references going to a single location, it can present a problem because you don't know where the calling function was from.
Yeah. So that's part of this again of mapping stuff. So, and that's useful because why? Well, if you want to say, well, I have this big set of all the citizens of the United States. So that's too many people. Well, let me say all the people that are citizens that reside in Idaho, citizens that reside in Nevada, right? What I've done is I've mapped the states of the United States into 50 individual spots. So I can treat everyone on Idaho differently from Florida, from Illinois, right? Because I mapped many to one. Now, it means when I talk about somebody from state of Washington, I don't know which person, but I have a convenient smaller set that I can.
All right. So let's assume that you have an injection where you have a one-to-one correspondence, but you also have a surjection, where a surjection, remember, is just a minimum of one. So if I had a set, let's say I had a set of 1, 2, 3, which is going to be natural numbers, and I had a set of A, B, C, okay, and I assigned a
bijunction.
Equivalence between A and 1, right? So there's a
equals
biconditional
1, B equals 2,
exactly.
So
A is
and that's a total thing, right?
Right. So A is mapped to 1, 1 is mapped to A, B is mapped to 2. It's not necessarily equal, right? Because equal is going to apply a little bit different. This is mapping functions. So if A maps to 1,
A represents 1,
exactly.
1 represents A.
Perfect.
In your shelf analogy, I have 3 shelves on this side, 3 shelves on that side. 1, 2, 3, ABC, and I've got
strings going across, right? So one goes to A, exactly. So in that case, right, I have a straight bijection. It is both an injection and a surjection. It is a bijection, which is a one-to-one correspondence, and you also know where things came from, right?
Mathematics, we call that one-to-one and on-to.
Right.
Right. Now, and so how does this apply to the analogy and the debate?
Because this is really critical, because they're talking about one-to correspondence for countable infinity. Right. This is what William and Craig, and this is what Dr. Malpass were talking about. What it means to be a countable infinity. A countable infinity is a bijection to the real numbers. It is something that it says, okay, there's a one-to-one correspondence with the natural set, which is what he started with n, because you know where they talk about n. N represents a natural set, where it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you know, all the way to infinity. So if you can have a one-to-one correspondence, a bijection to map on the natural numbers, that is what they call a countable infinity. The disagreement that they had is where I couldn't understand who thought what, because William Lane Craig says one thing about what would be a countable infinity. Alex was saying another. Now, Alex had pointed out that some other people have disagreed with him. Some people disagree with William Lane Craig. I don't know who was arguing what they consider to be a countable infinity, because a countable infinity, for example, even numbers, the even integers, that's a countable infinity, right? Maps one-to-one to the real numbers, so that would be countable, right?
Yeah, because you go to 0, 2, 4, 6, 8.
Okay.
There's successor function and so forth.
Well, there seemed to me to be a disconnect in the discussion that they were having, because they were talking about whether or not you could count to 0 or count to infinity, versus whether or not it was possible.
Yeah, that's completely irrelevant, right?
That's kind of the thing. That's unfortunate, because here again, I didn't see the debate, or I didn't hear the debate, but in mathematics, you're talking about a fact, right? And so it's like,
right, yeah, that's why I was confused.
But
I was like, okay, if I can count from 1 to 2.
But this may be part of the problem of I think a crisis in philosophy is when you have philosophers that do not understand well mathematics.
But who was wrong here? This is where we don't understand. Was Craig or Malpass? Because look, for example, I think they both agree that like the integers is a countable set, whether it be 2n or count integer. Z maps to n. Okay, because Z is a countable infinity. Yeah. Other things are not. The reals are not countable infinity. There's no mapping between real numbers to map to the natural numbers, right?
And so the question becomes, in mathematics, it's a fact, right? And there's no debate.
These are uncontestable things, right? I don't think either one would argue this.
But the problem is that the problem with one of the difficulties in philosophy is that people use words. In mathematics, you don't use words. You use mathematics.
Agreed.
Right. So what you're saying is that philosophy is struggling right now with these kinds of arguments because they're not taking from the sciences, they're not taking from the mathematics, which they could be taking from to make themselves better.
And if you deal with weird things like relativity and quantum mechanics, you quickly find that your words, your English words, or whatever language words, do not do justice of what's happening. Reality doesn't care about language. It does what it does, and language struggles to try to say things that are stuff. So you got to be careful when you use.
Yeah.
If I can ask people who watch the debate, and this is Cheshire and I talked earlier, and this suggested I have two hangouts on this, right? And because it gives people time to watch this and gives people to watch the actual debate. So we'll discuss this more tomorrow on the actual debate that they had. Please find out from me what you guys think was the actual argument between William Lane Craig and Malpass on countable infinities, right? Because we all recognize certain things. We recognize that real numbers are not countable infinity. Rational numbers are not countable infinity. Even the integral between or the interval between.
Stop and say
sure.
So Cheshire, do you understand about why the reals are different than the integers?
Why they're uncountable?
No idea.
Right. So let's use your shelf analogy, right? If you have even an infinite shelf on this side, infinite shelves on this side, you could say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and draw strings, right? Now let's say we're not going to deal with the whole numbers. We're going to deal with any value, right? I say, okay, 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10. Okay, I could count those, but what's the next value greater than 0 that's not 0?
What's the next thing?
I know the answer. Pick me.
So think about and there's not. So what's the next? What's greater than 0 but not 0?
I'll just keep my hand up.
And what's the smallest value that's greater than 0 but not 0?
Just because the way Steve's acting is making me want to answer with 0.99 repeating.
No.
But
The correct.
Well, I would, yeah, because wouldn't the answer be not able to be expressed in words because it's such a.
There is none.
There's no shelving.
Did I get it?
Close enough.
Yes,
I'll take
you got it.
Yeah.
Right.
There is a caveat for this. We'll pendant real quick. There's a caveat for this dealing with neighborhoods and hyperreals. But we're talking about the reals, right? So
but the real.
But yes,
So-
you're exactly right.
There's no shelving. You could sit
There's
there and
no
say,
number next
so-
to 0 that's
Zero.
not number 0.
It's
Yeah.
the so basically in the analogy, it is the space between the shelves.
There is no space. It's well,
exactly.
No, I don't think so. Hang on.
Shashar. No, understand. You're right, Shashar. That if you go from shelves to just a stick, and you say I string over to some spot on the stick, there's an infinite spots on the stick you can stick things to.
But that's why we have a continuum.
That's the real, right? There's
Yeah.
no longer discrete shelves. They're just
The continuum.
and so you can just have infinite number of thin wires going from a shelf to a spot on a stick, and you never get anywhere on the stick because they all map to a small tiny spot. And
It's such a small,
And Cheshire, the way you worded it, I do get what you're saying now. Exactly. And what's really amazing by that is this is something else they talked about. Do you remember when they talked about Cantor? This is what Cantor actually discovered in his diagonal proof, is that there is a cardinalities to be had in dealing with infinities. And an alpha 1, which is the reals, has a different cardinal order than the alpha null.
So Chesh,
they're not mappable to each other. That's why
between 0 and 1,
accountable infinity.
Between 0 and 1, there's an infinite number of values.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, so that was my question. This is what I asked Steve before Landon got in. I was asking about if they're talking about infinity and being able to count an infinite amount of numbers. I said, okay, well, can I count from 1, 2 to 3? The answer, yeah, of course I can count 1, 2, and 3. But then my question was essentially towards Craig's argument was, well, how many numbers and how much infinite numbers between those points did I just go through?
You skipped, an infinite amount of them.
So if I was able to skip an infinite number, then I've clearly already counted 2 and past infinity.
And Cheshire, here's the thing.
Well, it's not an actual infinity, though. You're not counting past an actual infinity.
So Cheshire, between two values that on the real number line, two values that aren't the same, there always are an infinite number of values between them.
Right.
So if you have two spots on that stick that aren't the same spot, there are always an infinite number of points. And so all those shells you have, the infinite number of shells, can all map. No matter how close you to the two dots together, they can all map to that spot.
Right.
And so the question becomes, how many spots are there on the string? A different type of infinity.
Yes. A higher order of infinity. And
than the shells.
One of the conditions for the reals, Chesh, is that for any two numbers you're given, x and y, there must be a number between them divisible by 2. X plus y divided by 2 is a condition for
where
reals.
x does not equal y.
Where x does not, when the x does not equal y, x is greater than y or less than y, when they're not equal, it must be the case that there's always, but if they're equal to each other, obviously there's no number between them, they're the same number. But if x and y are different numbers, there has to be a number divided by 2 that exists between them to be in the natural continuum.
So this is my other question, which may or may not, it will probably relate more to when we talk about the debate later. But I seemed to gather that there was a confusion, or one was talking about this and one was talking about the other, and it was what could be observed versus what actually is. So if the hotel has an infinite number, that doesn't mean you were observing an infinite number through that entire amount of time. So I can count for infinity without ever actually reaching infinity, but that doesn't mean the infinity doesn't work because it's what I'm able to observe, not what actually exists.
But Hilbert stays within alpha null. I mean, because it's still all mapped to natural.
In space, in observation and astronomy, right? There's a finite amount of space we can see, assuming relativity is correct, that we can't see infinitely far because those objects, if they exist, haven't been able to have enough time to send their photons for us to see them.
Right.
Well, the question is it universe infinite? We don't know. What we can observe is finite.
Right. So we have to treat it as if it is and it isn't at the same time because we don't have the answer.
And the question becomes the Big Bang. Did the Big Bang create an infinite universe or a finite universe? We don't know. But just like saying when you build a stick for shelves, you created an infinite number of points. Even though the shelf is a finite length. If it's Cheshire sized stick, there's still an infinite number of points, no matter how big or small you are.
I am the tallest. I am infinitely tall.
Yes, you have infinite points. So this is a case, again, it's important, again, folks, when you're dealing with infinities, accept them as a concept. Don't try to visualize them as a finite thing.
Right, exactly.
And I think a lot of people get hung up in religion because they have this so-called omniscient thingy that they try to put finite things onto, and vice versa. It's bizarre. A lot of really bad violations because people don't understand infinity.
Let's ask Jess this if she got the concept down. So I have a line that's 1 inch long, and I have a line that's 1 mile long. How many points on the 1 inch line is compared to how many points are on the 1 mile line?
They're both infinite.
They're both infinite, right?
Yay!
Now here's the question from Landon: is there a 1-to-1 mapping from point to point from one to the other? Yes, I think so too. But yeah, so she's got it right. She realized that even though one is longer than the other, some people would say, well, if it's longer, it has to have a higher infinity. No, there's there's still an infinite number of points on.
Well, yeah, it's bizarre. It's like this infinity is bigger than this one is.
Yes.
Yeah, and Cheshire, you're saying is there's a rule of how to go from 1 inch to 1 Cheshire length. There's a rule. That's called a function, right? And so everything on that 1 inch can go to everything on the 1 Cheshire length.
Yes.
Right. So you could essentially take any kind of key if I was to be standing beside Steve, and you can use a key to say that this point equals this point on Steve, and then you can.
Yeah. Now the question becomes is if you replace that Cheshire length stick with an infinite stick, is there and you have a 1 inch segment, now is there a 1-to-1 mapping between the 1 inch segment and the infinite stick?
I would say yes, because if a stick is infinite, wouldn't it not have 1 inch within it somewhere?
There's a mapping, but how do you because and the answer is because you think of that 1 inch thing as the real numbers. There's just as many points between that as an infinite length.
Yeah, so the infinite can go into the finite, and the finite can also go infinite. You can go from one to the other and back and forth.
Yes.
Provided you have points of reference.
And just remember
Yay!
This is another thing. Anything you do to a finite set will change the finite set, but anything you do to an infinite set, it's still infinite. And this is why you don't think of infinity as
seemed
something that is a mathematical number, right? If I say I say 1 minus infinity, what does that mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, it's still infinity, right?
It's still infinity.
Right.
Anything you do to infinity is infinity.
Well, it seemed to me that during the debate they were trying to quantify less or more infinity. So the analogy that they gave was Saturn and Jupiter going around the sun how many times, and both were infinite if given an infinite amount of time. They both went around the sun infinite amount of time, but the total cannot equal the same number because their rates of circulating are different. But you would have to put a number on that infinite time before you would be able to decide which one is more or less, because
I need to clarify from my live chat there at the outside. I should clarify that actually infinity minus infinity is actually
I'm going to go to the bathroom.
Okay, it's actually undefined, and the reason being is because the elements in one infinite set might be not the same elements as another infinite set. So when you say infinity minus infinity, that is actually undefined. What does it mean? Because you don't know.
And the answer, of course, is because you have to go things like in mathematics, you have to deal with set theory and operator theory, and the answer is when you have something minus infinity or infinity minus something, even that something is infinity, you no longer are able to take the numbers that you're familiar with and apply them. So subtraction or addition on the number line of integers does not apply when you stick infinity into it.
Correct, because this is what I've always said. I said it's abusive notation, but you shouldn't use really infinity with any binary operator. It's just not. Yes. It's not a number to be used with a binary operator.
It's not defined. It does not have a
super chat real quick. By the way, yes, YouTube is messing up big time. We know there have been people that actually contacted YouTube. YouTube has admitted that they have issues right now. They're not notifying people like they were. It's probably because of the high demand. People are staying home, and they're probably throttling bandwidth. But numbers are down all over the place. So it's not this.
Blame Susan.
I do blame Susan. I called her the other day and said, hey, you know what? I'm blaming you. So thank you for the super chat. And by the way, what you can do to help is just share these videos. We appreciate getting these videos out there. Share them all over the place. That's going to help make us through these next couple months. Helios 575 for $5. Since Planck length is a thing, technically any finite distance also has a non-infinite measurable amount of points on it. The Planck length is a natural unit. It is a natural unit based upon the facts of the universe, right? And so when you're talking about Planck's length, there's no measurable distance to be had because you're dealing with a point source, right? So it is a single point.
But understanding these Planck lengths, because people say, well, isn't Planck mean that the universe is quantized? That's not what Planck said. What Planck said is that below a Planck length, you can no longer distinguish.
It's indiscernible. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean there aren't points in between.
Yeah. It could. Yeah.
There are certainly smaller distances than Planck length.
The resolution.
A half a Planck length. Yeah. That's a perfectly valid measure. Mm-hmm. The problem is that you can't discern. Once you go below the Planck length, you can no longer discern distances that small.
Yeah.
In any way.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they aren't there. It means you can't discern it. You can't distinguish it in a physical process. Philosophically, you can do everything you want to, but you stick.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying. It's a physical limitation of the universe itself. It's doing the granularity of the universe, right?
Well, no. It's not the granularity. It doesn't have an answer. Well, this is one of the problems that people have and religious people have with science is that there are things that don't have an answer.
That's fair
enough.
I'm okay with that.
The question of what's the largest value, what's the smallest value greater than zero that's not zero?
Yeah.
That
doesn't exist. But I would agree with you that it's unanswerable. But it does have utility, right? I mean, Planck, even though Planck length, for example, I could say Planck square, and a Planck square is what we use in a holographic principle. Is a Planck square is what stores a qubit, right? For information of the universe. So if you have the observable event horizon, which is the surface area of the universe itself, the amount of information in the universe is encoded in very, very high entropic state, but it is encoded in Planck squares on the observable event horizon.
So understand that Planck length. Go ahead.
I just have the questions that I've been taking as we've been going whenever we're ready for them, because we are coming up at the 80-minute mark. So whenever you guys are ready.
I want to say that so the Planck length is about 1.6 times 10 to the minus 35 meters. Really tiny amount.
Super small.
It does not mean that the universe is a bunch of points and they're Planck points. It means that your ability to distinguish two objects that are closer than one Planck length is none.
But I would still consider that. I'm sorry. I consider that a physical limitation in the universe. There's no possible way, no matter what our technology, in quantum, to have a resolution beyond the Planck.
But discernment does not mean that they aren't two objects there. It means you can't distinguish their position.
Right, which is a physical limitation.
And so, Cheshire, think of it this way: your strings. Let's say your strings are a yarn. Mm-hmm. It's impossible for you to get two spots that are close, that are smaller than a yarn width together.
Well, yeah, it would be like how closely can they be together for you to still be able to distinguish like strands
them, right?
on top of those. Yeah.
And that's so understand that Planck length doesn't mean that the universe is quantized. It means your ability to discern. And Planck
I'm not disagreeing with you, but when you talk about the granularity of the universe, there are things out there that have been experiments to determine whether the universe is quantized or not. That is unknowable right now, or not. Actually, it's unknown right now. It's maybe knowable, but right now we don't know if the universe is
there's observations that
or fine-grained or coarse-grained.
Yeah. We don't know, but.
Boy, see all the tangents we go down. We get Landon in here. It's great. I love that.
Oshkosh Bajosh for $4.99 said, "This has been so intriguing. Thank you so much for the discussion."
You're welcome. And by the way, what we might do in the future, coming up very soon, we'll probably get maybe even Landon or Robert, who's a mathematician. And what we do is go on the Great Debate Community channel and just show people this type of math, like visual stuff, because I think visually people may be able to understand these set things better, but we'll do that later.
But
there's also something to be said. It might be a good idea to set up my tablet so I can actually draw it while we're live.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
and get comfortable with concept of infinity, and don't feel like you're small because Cheshire length has an infinite number of points in it, right? She's an infinity.
No, Cheshire length is the smallest possible human. It's a physical limitation of humanity.
I'm a homunculus.
Let's get some questions
number
here.
Of points.
And by the way, Landon, I still have an idiot that comes around every so often that still argues 0.99 repeating is equal to 1. They're blocked across the board. I just delete their shit and block them at this point.
Of people who do not understand.
It's like flat Earth stuff. Right? It's And so I used to engage with these people, and I don't do it any longer. The reason I don't do it any longer.
Become comfortable with your inner infinity. You have an infinite number of those, by the way, in your body. So be comfortable with that.
Yeah. But like I said, I do have people occasionally, like one person just change their names. He just changes the name and comes around. I've just blocked them. I'm not going to deal with these people that are this inept. It is just like dealing with a flat earther. I've shown them the math is wrong. They are wrong. It's objective. Deal with it. But anyways, I'll answer questions, Josh.
Yes.
All right. So our first question was from Zebulon181 that was asking, why is all the rum gone? It's because we were watching a William Lane Craig debate. Negative Exponents asked, Landon, what are your thoughts on the concept of nothingness and if nothing can exist outside of mathematics?
So physics has problems with nothing in the physical realm. There is philosophical nothing. So an example is in physics, when you sit there and say there's a vacuum, nothing is there. Quantum mechanics says no. You don't get to have some infinitely precise zero state. It's a sea of virtual particles come in and out of existence. You say, well, isn't that philosophical mumbo jumbo? No, we can actually measure the force that those particles popping in and out of existence generate. It's demonstrated real. So nothing is actually, in fact, one of the ways you can think about what's the total energy of the universe. There's one model that says the total energy of the universe is actually zero. What do you mean zero? Well, if you think about potential energy and kinetic energy, you have something, you raise it up, it's got potential to fall down. When it falls down, goes bang, that's kinetic. Up, potential, kinetic, they're opposite of each other. If you sum up the entire universe, one model says the total sum of the energy of the universe is zero, because the question becomes, how could you have a big bang and not violate the conservation of energy? Answer, the total energy of the universe before the Big Bang, if that was even a valid concept, is zero. At the Big Bang was zero, and at now is zero. You haven't.
Okay, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense.
The net universe, the net sum of all energy is zero.
You've just and that's one of the cosmological models.
Well, I would ask then.
That's why cosmologists need to understand philosophy, because you begin to get philosophical, and you better be careful. You better have some good philosophy grounding when you start going that realm. But go ahead.
So to kind of like jump onto that question, so in that case, does that essentially mean that as long as there can be like a vacuum, but that vacuum meaning it has the potential for energy, it's never technically nothing?
That's correct.
Because the potential is always going to be there.
But you got to be.
The field is there.
Well, hang on though. You got to be very careful.
Yeah, there's space. Yeah.
You got to be real careful. Even in science, it's even what they mean by nothing, right? A vacuum could be considered nothing. Just certain.
That's why I specified with Landon's example that he gave.
Philosophical nothing is not scientific nothing. Philosophical nothing is the absence of anything in the set. We don't know if it's possible or not. We have no idea. And the thing is when people say like something cannot come from nothing, something can't come from nothing. We don't know that to be the case. There's nothing logically preventing it. There's nothing logically sustaining it. We have no idea one way or another. It is a philosophical unknown. So when people have that old adage, well, from nothing, nothing comes. That's just that. It's just an idiom. It's just a statement that's been made over and over and again that people believed, but there's no basis for it whatsoever. We don't know whether that's true or not.
And from a quantum point of view, if you talk about saying, well, I've got an atom, right? Let's say a hydrogen atom. I've got an electron that is in a shell around a proton, which is in the nucleus. What's in between the two? Well, actually, it turns out that there is a finite probability of you measuring either particle in any spot in between. it isn't exactly that there's nothing. There's actually is something there. But again, the problem is that when you talk about like the Noll set, the set that has no elements is a thing, right? The Noll set is something.
Right, yeah. Okay, so like even if it's nothing, it still has to be represented by something anyway.
Well, yeah, but you gotta be careful on that. That
It's
does get into
an object.
that does get into a verification fallacy, though. You gotta be careful on hypersubstantiation.
I understand. So the concept of nothing is we don't have an ability in science to handle it. We don't know any of that exists.
Yes.
And philosophy, the notion of nothing is a really deep subject.
It's a different kind of.
There are books.
Different question.
There are large books that have been written on nothing.
Right.
Yeah. a lot of something about nothing, right?
Much ado about nothing.
Yeah.
What other questions we have?
Okay, so RNGD Gaming asked a question for Landon: how long would a combination of RSA and AES be using a 4096 bit key take to crack?
The hacker is asking this question. I want people to know that. Hacker.
Okay. So
Haxor.
Yeah, he's a lead hacker now.
So you're talking about these critical systems that like AES has 2 to 256 points. So 2 to 256 power points map to 256 power of points, right? That's the mapping, right, Cheshire? You have 2 raised to 256 power shells on your plain text going to the same number of shells on ciphertext, and you have that number of ways of drawing string from one spot to another. That's what AES 256 is. And it's a pretty good system so far. It survived. It's not random. It's not truly random. We can actually distinguish it from a true random mapping, but it's pretty good. RSA is another process by which there's has to do with multiplication systems and phi of n things, but it's basically the RSA is about us saying, if I tell you the number 15 and ask you what did you multiply to get 15, you think a bit and say, 3 to 5.
Right.
Okay.
Or 1 to 15.
If I give you a 1 million digit number and it doesn't end in like a 0 or 2 or 5 or something, it ends in 1.
Right.
And ask
not
you
a
what
prime
two
number.
numbers, what, and let's say in fact I said this is a product of 2 primes. It's a 1 million digit number. What are the 2 primes? That's a really hard problem so far, right? That's what RSA struggles with. I mean, also, I think you have an
so
issue.
It's two systems used
One,
for encoding a mixture to see how long it would take.
You have an inherent problem, what's called determinacy, right? If I say what 2 numbers did I get to add together to get 10, it's undeterminate, right? Because
but you can figure out which ones are.
Yeah, you can figure out. You can say 10 plus, you can 9 plus 1. You can come up with different possibilities, right?
But it gets a lot easier if I know what equation that you used to get there. So what 2 points to multiply to?
Yes.
Yeah.
But when I talk about a number that's a million digits long, it might, and I say I picked 2 primes and I give you this million digit number, and I made sure you don't know what the primes are. It'll take a while to figure it out. The problem, of course, is this. Now, when you say I want a computer to do this, why? Because I'm doing a bank transaction. I'm going to do this public key thing. Well, now you've got some deterministic system that ended up generating those 2 primes I multiplied together to get this big number.
Right.
The way you attack that system is not by trying to factor that million digit number, but by figuring out the process which I came up with those primes in the first place. If I have a deterministic system that
is deciding those 2 numbers.
How does that deterministic system do something which appears to be spontaneous?
Right. And once you can figure that out, it makes figuring out the number super easy because now you know the process by which they got the number.
By the way, that's where Lavaran came from. Lavaran was a system I helped co-invent, which used lava light lamps bubbling to give a computer a stimulus to generate a number based
on like the bubbles.
Yeah. And worse than that is that the computer looks at it and you look at it, you're looking at two slightly different things. They have two slightly different systems. So you can't tell what the computer saw. You can see what it sort of looks like and you can recognize it, but the getting down the detail of this bit is extraordinarily difficult. Moreover, lava light lamp is like the weather. A tiny change in this blob, a tiny little light thing, a tiny little heat thing will cause the system to diverge rapidly. Even if you knew perfectly what the state of all the blob is in that lava light lamp, there's only a finite amount of time before your ability to understand what it does is zero. We in SGI,
it could just be like, oh, the lamp got hotter, it got cooler,
yeah.
or
and Silicon Graphics, when we bought Cray, we actually used Cray to try to model a love light lamp. Use this Cray, that was the big supercomputer at the time, and we race the supercomputer and take a picture, have the supercomputer try to predict what the thing is, and there was only a finite amount of time before the supercomputer was unable to predict what the lava light lamp would do.
It would have to reassess all the factors.
Even more complicated was modeling soap bubbles.
Yeah.
Soap bubbles was almost considered to be an impossible challenge at one time.
So there's a company called Cloudflare up in San Francisco, and they end up encrypting probably about 10-15%, I forget what their monitoring is, of the entire internet. And you know what they use for the basis? They have a wall of lava light lamps. And I can't look at those.
That's amazing. You realize that this is just going to turn into DEFCON 1 science tutoring Chesh.
Yeah, but there's a patent. I can bring out the patent. We actually got a patent on the thing. It's expired now. And it's because we want to hack the patent office. So we decided, hey, let's try to patent using lava light lamp generate keys. And we submitted a thing, and the patent office just said accepted all the keys and things. That was just completely bizarre, and so we made something that was there. By the way, it's free now. You can use this stuff, and so Cloudflare is welcome to do this. Back to RSA. Cool. The way you attack RSA is you say, how did they pick those primes in the first place?
Okay.
Many times what people do, like PGP, a really unsound cryptographic system that people use. How do you generate PGP? Well, I type in some characters, I move my mouse around, and do some stuff. Well, I do some finite amount of stuff to generate some prime. How do I deterministically do something which is non-deterministic? How do I take, and the best way that we think we could do it is use a system which is chaotic, like a picture of the ocean waves going in and out. Right.
So you make it random or chaotic by choosing a system that'll recognize that. Okay.
Exactly. But understand that chaos is not random.
Right.
If I show you a picture of
it appears
the
to
ocean
be.
edge, you'll sit there and ask you what it is. I say, well, that's the way it's in the ocean. If I say, okay, tell me what the ocean looks like an hour from this picture, you would be unable to tell.
Right.
So you have to go for the chaos and random, but you use chaotic systems
to
tell a computer to do something. But because what you do is you sit there and say, type this master password and let that use and unlock some key. Well, the result is you've got some finite thing that ends up unlocking some thing.
Can I give you an example that I've had to use, Landon?
Please. Please.
Back when we in nuke school, we had to learn thermodynamics, and you have the Stokes equations, and have your Stokes equations, and you have what's called the Reynolds number. And Reynolds number is basically where you go from laminar flow to a chaotic flow, turbulence, right? And this is essential when you're dealing with fluid that has some kind of viscosity going through a pipe. You want to reduce your head loss, right? You want to have you want to reduce your losses, because the more losses you have, the more energy you need to pump, and everything's critical on a ship, right? So this is all important stuff. And so when you're trying to model a chaotic system, when you're dealing with turbulence and flow in thermodynamics, and you have the Reynolds number that's going to tell you where it's going to be between the turbulent flow and the laminar flow. That type of modeling was, again, at one time considered to be nearly impossible to do. Even computers to this day still have problems with these types of equations to determine what the turbulistic flow is going to be at some specific boundary layer. It is extremely hard differential equations.
You've got water flowing along, a pipe, and water just goes from left to right, nice in there. You stick some stick in the middle of that pipe, and now you've got flow that's basically having to you get rapids, you get turbulence, you get stuff that starts to because the water has to move around the spot and gets all mixed up. That's the turbulent flow.
Yeah, you're still going to have turbulence with the walls itself because you have a laminar boundary layer, right? You have a laminar flow at the point of water and
the
pipe,
water hitting the
right?
edge of the pipe becomes.
And so as soon as you start moving away from that pipe toward the inner diameter, right, you start having more and more turbulence. And you can see this a lot with a flame, right? Take like the flame and smoke. It seems very straight, and as it goes up, it gets more and more turbulent. Water is the same kind of thing. You have a turbulent system. It's very, very difficult to model. Let's just put it that way. Very difficult.
And so there's a thing called you're called Navier-Stokes wave equation.
Navier-Stokes equations, yes.
It's an equation system that describes fluids, and it's currently not tractable. There's no closed form solution saying if I got this, it'll be that, right? The question is, can you even is that equation actually solvable?
Who knows?
There's
not a manifold.
If you know enough of the factors, it would be theoretically. I guess you could solve it, but you have to know
there's any closed form equation
that you wouldn't be able to know.
Just
without,
so it says water. You got a water flowing on a gully, and it's moving rocks and it's gurgling and so forth. Can you accurately predict what the water is going to do?
I don't think you can
over that rock, and that's the equation can describe what happens. But the equation is not solvable infinitely.
There's no general form solution, like example, like the three body problem. I don't think there's I don't think there's a mathematical analytical solution to that.
By the way, there's $1 million prize for the first person to describe it.
Yeah.
There are canned little contrived systems where you can say, well, if it does this, then it does that. But
that doesn't really solve the problem. I think when you're looking for a closed form solution over an infinite integral. You need to be able to describe that system in a deterministic way, and I don't think those do that.
On the other hand, you take the Navier-Stokes equations, you simplify them to be able to make some set statements, because if you Boeing aircraft, chunk. Will this airplane fall?
Well, yeah, you're getting approximations at that point, sure.
You get approximations, and they become good enough, but can you solve them?
And that's why they have utility, right? They have utilities because they're approximations, right? If you can narrow this stuff down to 6, 7, 8 decimal points, it's good enough for government work, right?
So Chesh, when the next time you see a lava light lamp and that bulb is going,
I have one downstairs that I just plugged in.
It's extremely complicated.
Understand that's a turbulent flow. It's not very fast,
but
slow. It's turbulent.
Yes,
and understand that if you take a picture of that thing and then have the fastest quantum thingy to try to mimic what it's going to do, there's a limit on how well you can mimic what that's going to do. Just like the weather, right? There's that butterfly effect, and tiny little changes that you're not aware of can cause this system to diverge.
Yeah, in 1 second you might be able to have a great approximation, but as time goes on, your approximation going to get weaker.
So back to the 2040, the 438 RSA key, for example, or so forth. The weakness right now with how RSA is implemented is most computers do a very poor job of picking a pair of random primes. And in fact, it's the random number generator you should be worried about, not your RSA algorithm or how many bits you have in your key. That's your weak point. So another example is, so we developed, and you can look up on GitHub, STS, Signal Science Patches. Look up STS on the Treachery GitHub. You'll find a system that can allow you to do highly parallel, very large random tests. We have looked at every cryptography system, every hash function, every encryption function, stream cipher, block cipher, blah, blah, blah. We've never found a system that is truly random. We can, given enough data, we can distinguish between, because when you encrypt something, is that random? No, it's deterministic. Why? Because you got to get back.
Well, I would say this, Landon. What do you think about this? And I know we're going to wrap it up soon. I know Chess has to go. To me, stochastic just means it appears to be random to us based upon the fact that we don't have enough information. That's stochasticism. But it's something completely random. In quantum cryptography, when it comes to decay rates, I would consider that to be something that is something to be actually random in nature, that is not based upon any kind of variable, that's not based upon anything that's deterministic. It is absolutely non-deterministic.
It's non-deterministic, but that non-deterministic doesn't mean random.
I think it is random, though.
So I just want to make sure I understand.
Good.
I just want to make sure I understand the difference. Random is something that is truly cannot be predicted, no matter how many of the, like essentially no matter what. However, something that is chaotic or indeterminate.
Random means the next number in the sequence has no bearing on the previous. Or the
there's no correspondence.
You cannot possibly know. Okay, gotcha.
There's no string.
Let me give you an example.
There's no prediction. There's no. Okay, and so the other one is to be non-deterministic and or chaotic. And in that case, it's not necessarily random, because if you know enough of the information or have enough of the variables, you can predict what's going to happen next. Whereas when something is fully random, you cannot predict it.
But chaos means that you're moving
outside of just guessing.
Well, you're moving the string around, and you can't figure out how the strings are going to be moving. Right?
Yeah, chaotic is still a deterministic system. The way I would describe it is this: for example, when back in the day when you were programming a game, you had a random seed generator. You basically give it a number. There was no such thing as an actually random pick. It didn't randomly pick something. You had to seed it, and it based on the clock of the CPU. It was nothing completely random. So what random would be this: let's say I have 100 atoms in a box. Okay.
Getting a shiny Pokemon in your game, there is a reason you get
that's
that
all
number,
deterministic from a random
but
seed.
It's not. It seems random, but it's not.
Correct. That's what stochastic means.
It's just very complicated.
It's random to us. But let's say I have 100 atoms of, for example, of some radioactive material, and I know that the half-life is 1 year. So 1 year, half of that material is going to be gone, right? There is no possible way, period, based upon understanding of quantum mechanics, what's would be called the Copenhagen interpretation. A pilot wave theory is going to be a little bit different, and what's called global hidden variable models. But they've determined that no local hidden variable model can exist, such that I could ever say this, but out of that 100, this one is going to be one in the one that's going to be decaying the first year as opposed to second. There's no possible way to know when something decays. That is by definition, I think, random, because it cannot be known one way or another.
So the one of the things that we talk about with cryptography is that one of the things that's, well, the RSA system might have, let's say you have a chaotic system that you're digitizing to generate your primes to do your RSA encryption. Now you say, well, how good is it? Well, there's an interesting question, which is is there a limit on how much the universe can compute? Is there a uncomputable and for practical purposes the answer is yes.
Yeah, it's limited. Mm-hmm.
So let's say I want to take the entire observable universe. I can't grab it, and I'm going to shrink that universe down to a small chunk. Why? Because I don't want to have the speed of light delaying me, but I'm going to shrink it down to the point where it's not where it becomes a black hole, just short of becoming a black hole. And I'm going to turn that entire universe into this magical quantum computer that can do all these Planck time, Planck length, Planck blah, blah, blah states. Can that thing do an infinite amount of work? Answer is no, given our current thing of cosmology. Yes. One of the things in particular is that we think that stable particles like protons decay.
Yeah, like 10 to the 32nd years.
Would it be able to at least be able to compute anything that's within it, though?
But I mean, because it's finite.
But you're talking about final computational power, though.
But for example, if I have some giant number, and let's say you employ the biggest quantum computer because you take all the observable universe and you bring it down and you try to give it an infinite amount of time. One of the problems is, of course, inflation. May say that thing's inflating, and as inflation goes on, you get less and less stuff you can control. But the problem, of course, is that if you're omniscient,
this is why I'm an atheist. That's what we're going to get into right now.
you only have a finite amount of time and a finite number of resources you can grab hold of before those resources decay. So there's only a finite amount of computation those resources could do, even if you slay the entire visible universe into some magical quantum computer to do some quantum complex calculations. So it turns out there are calculations that
visible universe is incapable of performing. So
Do you know you can also win the $1 million millennial thing if you can show that protons do decay in free space?
But let me say, if it turns out that if our understanding of relativity is correct, if the universe is inflating, and if all particles like protons and neutrons decay, if that's true, then even an omniscient being has only a finite amount of computational power.
Yeah, it can't be omnipotent.
Yeah, it's hard. But the concept of a pure omnipotence of all knowing is definitely a philosophical question, right?
But yeah, this is why I struggle with this. This comes down to why I go by being like, no, I don't think a god exists. Mostly because if you were to posit to me a god that wouldn't fall under this all powerful, all knowing being, I don't know that I would agree with defining it as a god.
Well, I mean, William Lane Craig puts in what's called middle knowledge. He puts it it's called modalism, and I know S.J. Thompson.
No, I immediately can't do like the Kalam Craig stuff.
No, not
only
Kalam.
because
Modalism.
I absolutely
it's
to accept the first premise.
This is not Kalam. This is called modalism. William Lane Craig is a very, very astute philosophical person. He knows his stuff. I mean, people discount him, and he knows it. I mean, they shouldn't. He's very formidable, right? And I don't have a problem with middle knowledge per se, modalism, monism, because it is philosophically viable. But the problem is if that's the case, God is basically limiting what he knows about a person, right? And in order to have that, that's one way to try to justify what's called libertarian free will or indeterminism, which I don't particularly accept, right? Now, I accept compatibilism, which is a form of self-determinism, but a lot of people out there in the philosophical communities just think that's wishy-washy. I know, I believe David Lewis, if I'm not mistaken, who was a person who promoted modal realism, that possible worlds do exist. I think he thinks self-compatibilism was kind of just an iffy way of solution. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Hume did too. But it's the best of all three, right? Because you only have determinism, hard determinism, soft determinism, and indeterminate. All three suck, and I don't believe in indeterminism. So, anyways.
Well, I would struggle with William Lane Craig's like the Christian God if you're going to think that there are multiple universes, because with multiple universes, an infinite and an omniscient, all-powerful God would be required to exist in all of them.
It depends.
And we just don't see that.
That's Plantinga's modal ontological argument.
So the work that Susskind and I did on the computational limits of the universe, assuming that relativity is correct, so that quantum mechanics is correct, and assuming that inflation is correct, and that nucleons decay, there's about 2 to the 630 power states that the universe can go through. So if your calculation requires 2 raised to the 630 power state changes, the universe you can't get the universe to do that, right?
But these are states that are not on the quantum level, right? These are actual macro states, correct?
Well, because part of the thing is that with entropy, there's heat generated, and the law of assuming also so you're supposed to assume the second law of thermodynamics is correct. Mm-hmm. Then essentially, as you try to get the universe to do something, and it generates heat and generates and you have order decays, there's only so much order you can get before your calculation become mesh. So it turns out there appears to be calculations that are mathematically tractable, that the universe, because there's finite visible limit, finite length you can hold onto it before it inflates, finite amount of time before your particles decay, finite amount of causality because of relativity, finite number of precision because of quantum mechanics. All that stuff conspires you to say that there are mathematical calculations you can do that the universe is incapable of performing. So what you do with RSA stuff is you sit there and say, all right, I'm going to use some quantum mechanical system to stimulate a computer to generate a pair of primes that, when multiplied together, are big enough that the universe is incapable of factoring, even if you take the entire universe, turn this magical quantum computer to try to do it in parallel. There appears to be ciphers that the universe could not brute force crack.
But that's not okay. But that's not just a time constraint. That's actually a physical limitation. It sounds like.
Yeah, there's supposed to be. Yeah. Even if you have an infinite amount of time,
it wouldn't be able to do it.
Relativity, quantum mechanics, inflation, particle decay,
it's all these constraints
are correct.
Right.
Are correct. Then the universe has a limited amount of limit. The universe is limited
in computational power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Even if the universe is limited, even if the universe is infinite, there's only a finite amount of time you can grab stuff, hold on to it, it remains usable in its state, and then bring it down to a spot and have it distinguished so you don't get Planck collisions and so forth. And quantum mechanics doesn't mess you up, and it doesn't turn into a black hole, because when your computer turns to a black hole, you lose. You have
you have information. It's just it's such a high entropic state to be unusable.
But guess what, Steve? Hawking admitted to me that his giving up on the encyclopedia bet was dodgy.
Really? I think we're very off topic here, and I I love Susskind, and I think Suskind's right on the firewall paradox, right? I do hold that it is a mainstay. I would call it. I don't call it this, but other people have called it this, and I do call it but it's called the Zeroth law. The Zeroth law of thermodynamics. No, that's not the law of thermodynamics. No, what he called the negative one law. The Zeroth law is A equals B, B equals C. It's transitive, right? So if if you have a system A that's in thermal equilibrium with B, and B is in thermal equilibrium with C, then A is in thermal equilibrium with C. But there is the negative one law that people have thrown around, which is that information is conserved, right? So in the universe, information is not destroyed. It's a bedrock of information theory and physics.
It appears to be, but it's not.
But it appears to be, right? It appears to be. But the firewall paradox kind of resolves that in some ways, because.
And so my discussion with Hawking was over. Well, but aren't there blah blah blah? Yes, that's possible. We don't think it is. But we haven't proven it. So if you haven't proven it, why did you give up?
Well, I don't think it's something. I don't think things are provable in science. But let's for the outside chat that we'll kind of end on this, because it's kind of I love this shit.
We did have one more question.
We'll get to it.
Please.
All right, so let's put it to the people out there so they understand what we're talking about here. If I have a computer chip, right, when that computer chip changes from bit state from 0 to 1, it generates heat. Okay, this is another reason why you have to cool down computers, because they generate heat when they change information. When you have something falling into a black hole, that information is being changed, right? It's being converted, to an energy, and that the information on that system is being changed, which is encoded on the black hole's event horizon. Matter of fact, the surface area of a black hole is the amount of information required to describe the state of the system, just like the holographic principle. Now, what the firewall paradox was saying was, if that's the case, then there should be an area of region of space above that black hole that is so hot that you would not survive transit, right? You would be obliterated. But at the same time, we should be able to see somebody go through the event horizon, because the event horizon should not change anything, because one of the conditions for falling into a black hole event horizon is that there's no discernible difference of not falling in. You would not notice yourself that you've entered the event horizon. But but here's the thing: how would you not notice if you're dead, right? Because in one theory, you have heat generated and you should die, and in another theory, you should pass right through like nothing happened.
Can I answer?
How does Susskind resolve this? And he did resolve it.
Can I answer?
Yes.
The answer is omae wa mo no shinderu. JoJo reference.
I don't get it, but my solution. I agree with
somebody
Suskind's
in the chat. Better get that, or I'm gonna be real sad.
Landon, what was Suskind's solution?
So our things that what we ended up with, actually, I was doing the number, is that 2 to the 762 power. I was incorrect last time. 2 to the 762 power is the maximum number of states they can have, because you assume that you can do 10 to the 90th operations per second, and a mass of the visible universe of 3 times 10 to the 52 kilograms. And before it turns into a black hole, and black holes are vibrating into nothing, you have 2.8 times 10 to the 139 seconds. The result is that universe, again, because understand you get heat dissipating and so forth, is limited to 2.8 times 10 to the 229 power. So 2.8 with 229 zeros.
Yeah, but that's a physical limitation because of the second law of thermodynamics.
That appears to be the if it's thermodynamics,
Yeah, that
quantum
entropy
mechanics,
has to be increasing in the
relativity, decay of particles, and are correct. So what back with RSA, if you use chaotic system to pick your primes, and your primes are big enough that it's beyond computable by the universe, then you only have a chance of that being a big. So what you do is you basically square that number and say the chances of the universe being lucky and guessing is so small that it will never in its entire lifetime of functionality. Because again, part of the thing about one of the impacts of the inflating universe is that the universe functionality is limited, even if you're omniscient. Right.
All right,
So the result is there is possible to build a cryptographic system. The universe can't compute and can't brute force.
So what was the answer to my question, though? How did Leonard Susskind resolve the firewall paradox that got Hawking to admit that information is conserved, and that and by the way, like you said, if he might have said he might have messed up, he did lose the bet. I mean, to his own admission. I mean, he paid him like $100, but how does Susskind resolve the firewall paradox?
I mean, I think part of the question is that they observed again from quantum mechanics that the state is one of the arguments was that information conserved. Another question is that falling through the event horizon of a black hole in many ways may not be observable. If you are the object falling in, you don't necessarily know you've gone past the point of return. There's no magic boundary, right? And so from the outside perspective, you don't see it fall in, but from the object falling in, you do see it fall in, and your state doesn't change. Right?
Yeah. So the reality is that both happens from the outside, like you said. So the outside observer, one thing occurs. According to you, though, you're observing something completely different. You didn't vaporize. You fell right through like nothing happened.
So as you approach that boundary of the point of no return, you relative to you, the clock, their clock goes slower and slower and appears to stop before it gets there. What they see when you look, your clock becomes infinitely fast, but you still pass through the boundary.
Yeah, but you don't notice that until you pass. And then
but while you're past, then you no longer see the clock on the outside.
Yeah, but if it's a supermassive black hole with no tidal gravitational tidal forces, you're just gonna be like, nothing's changed until things start changing, and then you hit the singularity like 2 seconds later or whatever. But for the outside observer, you're just gonna see either people burn up, or you're gonna see them just like turn into infrared. As the wavelength gets longer and longer. But Faraday paradox was two competing models that said, hey, this is supposed to happen according to this model. This is supposed to happen in this model. Is information conserved? And I think that Susskind was right that information is conserved. I think it is a fundamental property of the universe.
But it's not provable, and so I wouldn't give.
I don't think anything's provable in science. So I don't care about that.
But it's not falsifiable. May not be falsifiable. But the question, of course, is back to one last thing on that cryptography thing. You mentioned AES and RSA. I would say be very, 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 very careful of elliptic curve cryptography, because it's not determined. We understand the computational problem of factoring, but elliptic curve cracking is still unknown.
But it's still based upon the fact that it's in order to do RSA cracking, right? If you have if you don't have the decryption key, that it would take an impossible amount of time by brute force to crack it, right?
Yes. And if you push it into the universe where it's uncomputable, then by our current understanding of the universe, it's beyond recognition. Well, the elliptic curve stuff appears that there's appearances that there might be cracks in that system. So I would still favor RSA. Don't be deceived by the fact that the elliptic curve seems to have smaller keys. That actually may be its problem. But
so it's not the size of the key so much, though. It's the processing power to actually try to decrypt it in a finite amount of time.
Yeah, and we know that there are measure zero number of elliptic curves that are crackable by their properties, not by the brute force. That is if you pick a random curve, there's a
essentially there is a section of those random curves that are flawed by design.
All right, we got one more question to go. We got to wrap it up. So.
Zero.
And we're at the 2 hour mark.
I know. I'm looking at the time.
You have to run.
I know.
So I'm just gonna give you the question, and then I'm gonna dip and let you two have your fun. But Zebulon181 asked, "What does it mean when they say information cannot be lost and/or destroyed?" And have fun with that one, guys. Oh, and I do want to make one correction. It was not a JoJo reference. It was Fist of the North Star. My mistake.
Okay. By the way, I'll take Joshua, thank you very much. You asked some excellent questions
for a girl.
Thank you.
For a girl, for a goblin, yeah, whatever.
And understand that science is about questions, and you actually asked some really excellent scientific questions. So hats off.
Thank you, and thank you for having patience and answering some of my questions.
Thank you.
So
awesome.
I'll see you around again.
Thanks, Jess.
Bye, guys.
I'll take a crack at this real quick, then Landon. So about information being destroyed. Like I said, whenever information is changed, there's heat generated, right? So there's an entropic change in the universe, which is the second law of thermodynamics, that the overall net entropy of the universe must go up, right? So when we're talking about information being conserved, is what's, like, for example, what falls into a black hole, can it be reconstituted? Can we know what exactly fell into that black hole? Is that information somewhere out there? By the way, is he frozen?
I'm fine.
Can you is it my end or your end? Because I'm not seeing you move.
I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you fine.
Weird though. You're not moving. Can you?
You hear me though.
I can hear you though. Okay, so we're gonna wrap it up anyway. So we're having a glitch, but you can hear me. So because we want to know if that information is reconstitutable, and so everything that's ever fell into a black hole is actually informational wise encoded on the black hole's event horizon. It is highly entropic. It is basically unusable information. It's stored in Planck lengths or Planck squares in qubits on that surface area, but it is there. In theory, you should be able to say, this is what fell into that black hole, right? We know everything that's ever momentum and position, anything that's gone in the black hole, that information is still available to us on the event horizon. But it's so entropic to be extremely difficult, if not nearly impossible, to probably determine. For example, if you have a hologram, if you look at a hologram slide, right, and you look at it, it's all over the place. You cannot tell in a two-dimensional object what that hologram is going to be, unless you have the ability to determine how to get that information out of it. One of the ways to extract information from a two-dimensional hologram, right, is to shine a light through it, and then it produces a three-dimensional representation, right? So if I'm just looking at a slide, and I'm not saying that's a hologram, I'm saying that is the it's the information encoded that will give us a three-dimensional hologram. I cannot decode it until I shine a light through it. Once I shine a light through it, all that stuff that appears to be highly confused and mixed mangled and it's unreadable. It's an unreadable format until I shine a light through it. Now I can tell what's the three-dimensional object supposed to be.
Excellent.
So that's why we say that information is conserved. It's still available, but it's an extremely unusable entropic state.
Yeah, and so
oh, did we lose Landon? Are you there? You're breaking.
I'm still here.
All right, continue. So, what do you think? Is that
so
okay?
I like to say there are actually 7 possible solutions about information falling in a black hole, right? One solution, a common acceptance solution. One solution is the information irretrievably lost, right? Mm-hmm. Another is that the information gradually leaks out because of black hole evaporation, right? That's what Hawking thought it might be, the Hawking radiation. Mm-hmm. Another is that information suddenly escapes during the last stage of the black hole evaporation. As the black hole evaporates, the final burst is of this information that was contained within the black hole suddenly comes out.
Mm-hmm. And that becomes now on the event. That would be on the observable horizon then. Okay.
Yes. Another is that the information is stored in a Planck-sized remnant, mm-hmm. right? Its information is there, but it's encoded in a Planck thing, and you can't distinguish it. Mm-hmm. The other is the information is stored in a large remnant. You don't have a singularity. You have a inside the black hole. You have a blob, and when it evaporates down that blob, there's your information. Another is the information is stored in a beta universe that separates from. You have a multi-universe thing. The universe is in another universe, and you can't get to it. It's there, but it's another universe, and
Yep.
too bad.
Yep.
And the final is the universe is encoded in a correlation between the past and the future. So the information is there, but it's correlated between causality between past and future. There are, by the way, each of those I could describe an advantage and disadvantage. I'm giving you sort of 7 common discussions, which to me, back when it talked about Hawking about those 7 things, and we had a discussion at Hawking speed, which means you have to wait for him to do his eye twitching and da-da-da and have his voice come out back and forth. It took several hours to have this conversation, but the answer was yes. I think it gradually leaks out by information, by Hawking radiation.
By Hawking radiation, right. That's what his position is.
And I said, that's probably the right thing. And so I gave up the bet because I thought probably that's the best solution, but I can't prove it. And so if I wanted to be legalistic, I could have held on to the bet. And he said, you're right to say that the bet was that he gave up rather than it was proven.
But I don't know if that was the actual bet. If I remember correctly, the bet was $100 that information is conserved or not. Now,
it was a block of encyclopedias.
Yeah, did Hawking did he argue ever that information was not conserved, that there was a violation of that
for
principle?
A while? He thought
he started to, right, initially. Okay.
Yes.
Now again, I've read many different ways it could be conserved, and you're right. There's many different things like the baby universes. It could be encoded in these Planck squares. It could be dark. There's dark energy now. They're theorizing inside of a possible black hole. There's a whole bunch of different ways energy conserved, but the whole question would still boil down to: is it a fundamental tenet of reality? A -1 entropic law or thermodynamic law that information is conserved. I'm pretty convinced that is a tenet of physics now.
Because we both said that the quantum mechanical argument is strong, but it's not solid. On the other hand, we both also said the second law of thermodynamics is probably going to survive, even though relativity and quantum mechanics might be modified. Second law of thermodynamics is the one you do not want to bet against.
Yes, I agree with that, because I don't believe in over-unity devices, and we've sustained over countless period of time that over-unity doesn't exist. The second law of thermodynamics has been time and time again shown to be the case. I would not.
And even in 2016, he was postulating about theories of information moving in out of a black hole that are possible models. But again, his argument was, I can't prove it. So if he said, I gave up on the bet because I thought I was probably wrong.
Yeah, because it wasn't demonstrable at the time. Yeah,
but not proven wrong.
Yeah.
So that was our thing, was
that
yes, he gave up because he was probably wrong, but he couldn't prove it. So he said, why be legalistic? I gave up the bet.
That's fair.
Encyclopedias.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, Landon, we got to wrap it up. Cheshire is going over to her channel. She's going to have a halftime of the month show. I'm not sure who she's having on, but hey, go check it out. Landon, I know you're frozen right now on my end. I don't know why. Maybe it's just me. But
I can hear you just fine.
Yeah, it's fine. As long as we got audio. But always a pleasure having you come in on these DEFCON 1 Sciences. We need to do more of them.
Let's do it again.
I might have a math hangout on the GDC sometime toward the end of the week. If we want to talk about set theory, it would be great. I really like to have somebody come in and talk about ZFC one day, axiom of choice, things that would be fascinating to me, the Weld order principle. These things I think are very difficult for a lot of people to understand, including myself. ZFC is not something that I have a good handle on. But just having, a basic hangout and showing actual diagrams, what it would mean to have a real set. What does it mean to have a complex set? What does it mean to have natural set? What does it mean to have an integer set? And then we can go over stuff we talked about. Would be great.
Isn't that like Zermelo
Frankel? Yes.
Frankel.
Yeah. And so when you have something like that and you have the axiom of choice or not, whether a set of all things contain itself, like Russell's paradox, whether you're able to have a free choice of choosing one from an infinite amount of sets. These are complicated type things. I don't have a handle on it, and I'm not going to pretend to have a handle on it. I don't. I know the very basics of these topics, and so.
So again, thank you very much. Thank you to Cheshire. She asked excellent questions.
That's why I keep her around,
man. That's. I mean, kudos to her scientific prowess for asking questions.
She represents the masses. She represents the audience, because I figure if she asks the question, it's kind of the question that I think the audience wants to know, right?
But she asked excellent questions, and of course you of course really ask amazing questions. Yes, excellent. Your questions are quite amazing.
I try to put some thought into them.
Yeah. So folks, if this is something you're interested in, consider being a patron of this gentleman. Thank you for the donations you've given
Yeah,
so
very
far,
much so.
but
It's
also
been
consider,
hard this because YouTube is not promoting anybody right now. A lot of people are telling me they're not getting notifications. They're not showing up subscriptions. It's been really difficult because I mean our numbers are down across the board. Every content creator
and
I've talked
it
to.
was wonderful to have a discussion to not talk about the C word or the V word, because if you say those things, then the bot comes along and it demonetizes. So we won't say
tell me
those
about
words.
it. Yeah.
But again, it was enjoyable to have that stuff. Let's have a discussion again.
Will do.
And folks, again, in the end, just be comfortable with infinities existing, and don't apply finite thinking to infinite stuff, because down that road lies madness. Cantor can tell you that.
He went mad.
Yes.
Okay. Well, there you go. Don't go mad. Good night, y'all.